This is a weapon that I didn't like that much at first, the Swords of Night. But then I grew up to love it because it's a very straightforward and very powerful weapon. So let's do a little bit of an introduction to the Swords of Knights to see whether you fancy or not the weapon for you to make a build out of it. Pros and cons. One of them being, at the same time, the same duality of the coin. It's a pro and a con at the same time. That, like I said, it's a very straightforward weapon. That it reaches the maximum potential of damage at 150 builds. Why is that a bad and a good thing as well? Well, it's a bad thing because there's people that like to go beyond 150, and there's better weapons that are going to reach higher potentials of AR damage. This one has a B scaling and dexterity, meaning that even the 80 hard cap, it's not going to do that much for the weapon because the scaling is not something that crazy. However, at 150, which is the maximum potential that you're going to reach with this weapon, it's going to reach 700 AR. For your comparison and for your references, usually katanas, regular katanas, reach between 550 and 600 AR. However, you can infuse them. This one cannot be infused. And while it cannot be infused, it has the AR damage is just so great that it feels like it's an infused weapon. It also has magic damage, so you might say that it's always infused. So for your reference, by all means, of course, it would be like an infused magic Uchigatana. The only trade-off is that you cannot change the Ash of War. So let's talk about the versatility of the Ash of War of the weapon. It can negate shield detection, so it's very useful for exploration when you're fighting against, for example, Black Knights, that they have these huge shields. It staggers them, it attacks, it pierces the shields, and it deals tremendous amounts of damage. Depending on resistances and how you charge the weapon, and if you're using the buffs that we'll be using for this build, sometimes you can deal 6k damage with a charge Ash of War. However, you're not going to, in some instances, in some bosses, they are not going to allow you to charge the Ash of War, which more often than not, you're going to be dealing 3k damage with the Ash of War. So these are the stats for the builds. Like I mentioned, it's a very straightforward build. It costs a little bit of a FP, but more often than not, you're going to kill things before you actually run out of your cerulean tears. Bigger 60, Mind 24. Endurance 25. This is not a heavy weapon, not at all. Strength, it should be 11. 14 is the byproduct of my starting class. Dexterity 80, the hard cap, and faith. This is very much important because we're going to be using 2 spells. So 15 faith. So for the equipment, we have the Swords of Knights plus 10. I usually like to have a wakizashi in my offhands to be able to bypass or avoid those huge AoEs that some of the enemies may or may not have. So for example, this time around I like to use the Feather Mists. I'll show you in a little while which Ash of War am I using here with my wakizashi, because I think that it fits the style right here, but you can also use Bloodhound Stab. Remember that this is only to avoid the huge AoE that some enemies may or may not have. And then as for the shields, you shouldn't really have a shield, or a shield, it's not needed, but if you're going to do so, Mesmer Soldi Shields, it doesn't require that much strength, and it has a nice 66 Carpus, which is amazing. The seal for the spells that we'll be using to buff our character, it's the Finger Seal right here. As for the armor, just remember, anything would work just fine. Just remember that you have to bypass that 51 poise threshold, because the Ash of War of the weapon doesn't have hyper armor, so you actually do need that poise for this character, with this character, even more than with the rest of the weapons that you might have in the roster of the game, and some of the katanas that actually do have some hyper armor under Ashes of War. This one doesn't. It has nice stagger damage, it doesn't have that much poise damage. So there's that indeed. Talismans, there's a lot of things that you would like to have in here. We have Millicent Prosthesis. As a matter of fact, that's why we have 80 Dexterity, because it gives us 5% more damage. There's a little bit of a concession that you can have with the Axe Talisman. You can either have the Wing Sword Insignia, which is going to somehow give you similar points into damage. However, I would say that you would be swapping in between back and forth for your heavy attacks and your usages of the Ash of War, because depending on the openings that you're going to have from your enemies, sometimes the enemy is not going to allow you to cast one Ash of War or to charge an Ash of War. In those instances, you are going to be charging heavy attacks which are faster than the Ash of War and the charge Ash of War, and that's going to take advantage of the Axe Talismans. The heavy attacks on this weapon are very good. The Godfrey icon also affects the charge Ash of War, so that's extra 20% more damage in your Ash of War. Shadow of Alexander, it's a native basic thing that you should always have, because we're going to be dealing most of the damage to bosses with this weapon with our Ashes of War. The final slots you can change. For example, you can interchange the slot that I was telling you about, the Axe Talisman, in between something that you consider a little bit your support kind of talisman. The Earth's Favorite +2, Grade Your Arsenal if you want to be using heavier armor, or maybe Turtle Talisman, Dragon Crest. That's overall your utility talisman that you would have and that you would swap depending on your needs. And remember that there's a lot of more damaging talismans that you can stock in here if you want to do so. If you feel that you're a little bit more of a aggressive player, then the Windsword Insignia would be better than the Axe Talisman. So yeah, it's just up to your personal preference in here. The Ash of War that I like to use in my Wakizashi, like always, just for your references, I like to use my Raptor of the Mists. This case, because I think that it fits the playstyle of the Sword of Knights, or the overall, yeah, the playstyle and the vibe that the weapon has, but by all means, you could also be using Bloodhound Step. Remember that you'll be using this to, for example, bypass the charge attacks that Gaius has, or, for example, the AoEs of Redan. Although I would say that the AoEs that Redan has are a little bit better to dodge him with the Raptor of the Mists, depending on whatever that you feel most comfortable with to bypass those AoEs. It's up to your personal preference. 2 spells. Flame grant me strength. Remember that we're not going to take advantage of the 20% extra fire damage that this thing is going to give us. However, it does give you like 20% extra physical damage. And if you buff your weapon, usually you're going to be having like 1k AR. Because of the talismans, usually our AR is going to be around 1k. And then we're going to be using Golden Bow for us to be able to have 15% more damage and 10% more damage negation. Remember that this requires 25 faith, which is why you're going to be required to use a Cerulean Tia. Faith Not Crystal Tia is going to give you 10 points into Faith, allowing you to completely buff your character to deal more damage. This is a very fast attacking weapon, like we mentioned on the Talisman section of the build. The Ash of War counts towards making consecutive attacks, and the Ash of War actually attacks like a maniac, as well as the heavy attacks that do 2 attacks. One of them doesn't deal that much damage, but it does count towards getting that extra attack. So this is a katana. Natively, it is a very fast attacking weapon, but the heavy attacks and the Ash of War, it's what's going to give you more often than not the extra damage that you'll have with this weapon, making it a monster. Because if you do consecutive casts of the Ash of War or the heavy attacks, you're always going to have this thing right here. Like I said, one of the huge downside of this build is that if you go beyond 150, there's not much that you can do to improve this character that much. There's not going to be that huge power spike that you're going to receive. So for example, if you're a higher level character, you can by all means, for example, if you're 250 or 200, you can have like a Uchi Katana as a quality with 80 strength and 80 dexterity that's going to reach higher damage than this one is going to do so. However, for 150 build, that's one of the good things about this weapon, that it has tremendous amounts of AR, like 700 AR damage. For a basic katana, that feels like an infused katana. For a hybrid build, a quality build, in between like something that could infuse your katana and have the basic damage of the weapon. So you already have a very powerful build at 150, and like I said, there's not too much that you can do to improve this build. Maybe add some points into mines a little bit more, but like I said, more often than not, things are going to die faster before you actually run. I usually carry like 2 Cerulean Tears, so there's that. It's a versatile build that allows you to do a whole bunch of attacks, that allows you to do a whole bunch of things, while exploration it's just excellent for those annoying Black Knights that have those huge shields. It staggers them, it also deals damage to them while they are blocking, and they are very defensive, as you might have noticed if you're fighting against them on the Shadowlands. Anyways, if you like the content, like and super appreciate it. Most of you that you're a gorgeous and beautiful person. You're indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. Subscribe to the channel, join the Discord. Have a beautiful day and goodbye.